I'm Patrick Henry with QuestFusion, as you know, and today I'm here with Larry Kesslin. Larry has spent the majority of his career building peer groups, mastermind groups, sometimes called mastermind peer groups or peer groups, and I'm delighted to have him here today. He's lived on the East Coast most of his life and been in San Diego the last 7 years. So we met each other through some networking events here. In fact, you know, he's a big time networker. So I met him, I think, at 2 or 3 different things. And finally we said we should actually get together and talk a little bit more. So to give you a little bit about Larry's background, he's a serial entrepreneur and the founder and chief connector at 5 Dots, a company that helps other companies grow their businesses. Larry has spent the last 25 years helping companies grow their businesses, in part by building and facilitating peer accountability groups. He is the co-author of BreakPoints, Where Businesses Get Stuck and How They Get Unstuck. Larry's focus is to help other people build more purpose-driven lives while at the same time being successful. Larry is a member of Rotary International and a board member at UTouch, an amazing organization changing the trajectory of young people's lives in Uganda. So welcome, Larry.
Thank you, Patrick. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So tell me a little more in depth, kind of your experience with peer groups and how you got started in that, and what kind of kept it going.
So I'll tell you where it started. I was working for the General Electric company back in the early 90s.
Okay.
And I quit in beginning of 1993. And met a gentleman who had started a radio show about entrepreneurship in '94, and joined him, and the internet started booming, and we started looking at how do we use the radio show is called Let's Talk Business.
Okay.
It was a show that interviewed entrepreneurs. So I got to meet Richard Branson a couple times in person, Wally Amos, Ken Blanchard, who wrote the foreword to BreakPoints, and I got to meet some amazing people on that journey. And we started to build this technology to allow entrepreneurs to collaborate online in 1995.
Wow.
So we started building really early. And we invested about $100,000 in software. We built this collaboration tool. And about halfway through the project, we invited about a dozen prospective members for our online community into a room. And imagine this is 1995. I'm a degreed engineer, and we're working with these small business owners. And halfway through the conversation, one guy raises his hand and he says, what's email? And we're talking about this collaborative space that we're building, and we're talking about this. We actually built an instant messenger before ICQ was bought by AOL, and it was all this stuff, and we were doing it in QuestFusion. It was a really cool project.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, Houston, there is a problem. Because I think we were way ahead of ourselves, but there were other people in New York and other places around the country that were starting to build face-to-face communities for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I've stayed away from the virtual collaboration world because of my experience back in the mid-90s, realizing that entrepreneurs are human creatures.
Yeah. They
need human connection. And ever since that point, we said, okay, if we're not going to build an online community, what about a face-to-face community? So on my birthday in 1996, which was September 10th, we held our first community meeting. There were about 75 entrepreneurs in the room, and we launched Let's Talk Business Network, which was a network of entrepreneurs in New York City.
Okay.
And that rolled into an opportunity. I was on a board in DC with a woman who was head of S&B marketing at Lucent at the time.
Okay.
And she said, Larry, I have 1,400 business partners that resell my phone systems. Says, all we do is teach them about technology. Could you help them run a better business?
Okay.
And they were about to spin out a new company called Avaya, which is pretty known company today.
Sure.
But this is back in 2000, and they did a roadshow called Avaya Live. And they said, Larry, could you come to a workshop at each of our 12 city tour? And I said, the best thing for me to do is sit in a room, invite the owners in, and have a roundtable discussion. And that's what we did in 12 cities. And after the 4th city, I realized, there's business models like YPO at the time and YEO at the time, which is now EO.
Yeah.
And Vistage, which was called Tech at the time, and Tab, and Renaissance Executive Forums. There were all these organizations that were all locally based.
Yeah.
And they would bring in people into this in the same city that did different things. And here I was in this community of people doing the same thing in different cities. So I ended up launching a company in 2000 and 2001, which was eventually called For Profit. And we ended up bringing together people that did the same thing in different cities versus bringing people in the same city that did different things.
So you basically had people fly in for these peer groups.
Yes.
On what frequency? How frequently would they do that?
We started out with 4 times a year and 1 day. And we realized that the 4 times a year was too frequent. It came too fast, and we ended up settling at 3.
Okay.
And we realized that if we did a day, starting dinner the night before and going through the next dinner, that people had to be out of town for 2 nights.
Okay.
And we moved it to starting at noon on the first day and finishing by 3 o'clock on the second day. So people that, if we did it in Chicago or Dallas, just about everybody could get in the day of,
Okay.
and everybody leave the night of. So they were only out of town 1 night.
Okay.
So we ended up doing 3 meetings a year. Typically, we had clients from all across the U.S. We had clients sometimes come from Florida. We had one come from London eventually when we did one program. And we ended up aligning ourselves with the major manufacturers in the IT reseller world.
Okay.
So we started with Avaya in 2000, 2001. 2003, IBM hired us to build a program for their resellers and their ISVs,
Okay.
independent software vendors. 2007, we launched a program with Cisco. And then 2010, we launched one with ShoreTel. And we ended up building a team of close to 10 of us that were doing peer group coaching. We had 3 sales managers, 2 leadership development resources, 2 ex-CEOs, and a marketing manager. And we could basically go into any one of those companies in that industry, and we could help them transition their companies wherever they wanted to go.
And how many people were typically in a peer group in your model?
Yeah, we started out with 8, and we ended up realizing that the ideal number for our group was probably somewhere between 10 and 12
Okay.
participants per group.
And how many people would show up at the quarterly or
Good question. At least 8 or 9.
Okay.
The best meetings were where we had at least 9 or 10 people.
Okay.
But we've had meetings where just stuff happened, and I mean, I ran the business through 9/11, so we had meetings where less people came, and some of the best meetings were only 4 or 5 people.
Okay.
Because people really got to know each other, and there was a group around them. Some people would video in, depending upon what year we were doing it. We could have some people participate virtually, but I think the size of the group is important long term, and for every meeting. But there are certain times when less people can be very, very effective for the people in the room.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously, since you were in this kind of peer collaboration space, you've studied some of these other models, and we talked about that, prior to the program here,
Sure.
about Vistage, YPO, and, YO, I guess it's called now.
It's EO, Entrepreneurs Organization.
EO now. So, talk to me a little bit about structured versus unstructured. What does that mean? Because a lot of people don't, maybe they've heard of peer groups, maybe they haven't, maybe they've heard of mastermind groups, maybe they haven't. But let's kind of talk through what are some of the fundamentals associated with these groups, and some of the vernacular or
Sure.
language associated with it.
Let's go back even further. So
Okay.
the mastermind itself
Yeah.
was first brought up in the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. So
Yeah.
Napoleon Hill studied all the great leaders of the first half of the 20th century. So if you look at Rockefeller and Ford and Carnegie and all these guys, they all collaborated with each other. And the more they collaborated with each other, the better their ideas got. And Napoleon Hill started researching all these people and said that was the model to greatness. And so I'd say in the late 80s, early 90s, it started to take shape. I know YEO was born. I know Doug Mellinger and the gentleman who started Gazelles, I'm blanking on his name, Vern Harnish, and a few others had started YEO out of ACE, which was the Association for Collegiate Entrepreneurs.
Okay.
And YPO is even a little bit older. And so there's barriers to getting into YPO and EO. So EO is the Entrepreneurs Organization. You have to have over $1 million in revenue. YPO, I think it's 5 million and certain number of employees and certain history in business. But both of those organizations are self-directed peer groups. They call them forums. And the forums are run by the participants themselves. And they can go through training. So I know a bunch of the trainers that actually train the groups to self-facilitate. If you look at Vistage, if you look at Renaissance Executive Forums, if you look at Sage here in town, if you look at most of the other organizations, they have a professional facilitator. Sometimes professional, sometimes not.
Yeah.
Or someone who has experience in running a business that is facilitating those meetings.
Okay.
And the structure of them is pretty similar. Most of the groups I've been to will break up their meetings into different components. The most important part for me when I started a group in the early stages of growing a group was actually getting the group to get to know each other. Because the real leverage comes when you know the other people in the room and you know who has the history that you want to learn from, and who's giving you ideas and who's giving you facts.
Yeah.
So I will always start every meeting by talk from your own perspective. And when you're saying something, say this is something I did or this is something I've thought about.
Yeah.
Because they're very different.
Yeah.
But just because you think about it doesn't mean it'll actually play out the way you thought.
Yeah.
So I'd actually rather have people talk about things from their own personal perspective of what they did versus what they think. Second thing is that one of the most important things in any group is confidentiality. So that what's said in the room is stays in the room. And I've had people come back years later and say, well, I talked to my wife about this, and then you get together with that person and their spouse, and some information comes out that you really don't want to come out. And you don't want that. You just don't want that. We call it pillow talk. So you just got to keep the stuff in the room that's said in the room.
Yeah.
And one of the most powerful things is to use a process. I know EO and YPO are very big on questioning versus stating. And the best way to get to the root cause of things, because typically when an entrepreneur shows up in a group, the problem they're bringing to you is not the problem. So many immature groups, somebody brings in an issue and they start trying to solve the problem.
Yeah.
But that's typically not the problem.
Yeah.
So most of them will go through a process where you're asking a lot of questions to get the root cause
Kind
of
of
the
the
problem.
Socratic method type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So most of the people that are in peer groups that are not professionally managed will just end up solving a lot of surface level issues without getting to the underlying core root of what the problem is in the first place. And I've used this a lot. When I see people that are thinking about peer groups, they say, well, I go to a conference and I meet a guy and he gives me some great advice. So I call that bar talk. So you meet somebody in a bar and you hear their story, and their story sounds great. If you were to see them in a peer group, and you were to see them over a year, or 18 months, or 2 years, or 5 years, you would realize that story in the bar is just that. It's a story.
Yeah.
So the reality of it is that the more you can spend time with people that you really get to know, and you get to understand, you create a brotherhood, there's so many things to it. But the different groups that have evolved over the last few years, I wouldn't say there's a right way or a wrong way. There are some people I know that are in YPO, they're in a Vistage group, and they're in an industry-specific group, which is the business that I ran for almost 15 years. So, and there's no right answer. There's just more places to get learning.
Yeah. And one of the things, kind of just based on my experience with what's worked and what hasn't, and some of this goes back for 20 years, some of it's over the last 3 to 5 years, you know, as you know, with having, you know, the struggles with Entropic before we sold it, you know, growing it and then having some challenges, and also starting QuestFusion and being more in this kind of open landscape type of environment where it's not industry specific, it's more horizontal with various entrepreneurs doing various different things, is that kind of there's 3 legs of the stool in terms of this getting other people's help. And one is, you know, having a mentor, which I've always had. One is being in a peer group, which if you're not a CEO, if you're part of a management team and it's a high functioning management team, you actually have a built-in peer group there. But as a CEO or as business owner, there's things that you really don't want to and probably shouldn't talk to your management team about and probably shouldn't talk to your board about.
Until it's fleshed out.
And
when the time's appropriate.
Yeah, when the time's appropriate. But if you're brainstorming with your board all the time, it's not a good thing, trust me. You know, you need to have solutions to problems. You have to bring up problems. I'm totally for transparency, but if you're just like throwing the problems on the table constantly, that's not leadership, that's not management. And then the final thing is, you know, networking, just kind of open networking. And I've kind of gotten more refined models that work for me in the peer group setting and in the networking setting over time. But I think a lot of times, and as at your suggestion, I conducted a short 3-question survey within my network, which actually was, you know, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but there was a lot of receptivity and answers to those questions, which it was really interesting for me, not as interesting for you because you've done this before. But there was confusion about what a peer group really is. And, you know, is it networking or is it an advisory group or is it this or is it that? Can you talk a little bit about that? You can baseline people and see, when you talk to people and you start talking about peer groups, do they generally understand what you're talking about or do they think it's something else?
Most of them are confused unless they've been in one.
Yeah.
And even if they've been in one, sometimes they're different. So if you look at EO and YPO, you're forbidden from doing business with the other people in the group.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the code that you live by.
Yeah.
Other groups you don't. So I know there are certain groups in town where you go to and a lot of people are doing business with each other, it changes the dynamic of the group.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had coaches that I hired to facilitate our peer groups, and I didn't want them coaching the people in the group. Because when you're even coaching the person in the group one-on-one and they come to the group, because I did the same thing. I was a coach and I had people show up for the groups. And the most amazing part is that they'd say one thing to me in a one-on-one session and they show up totally different for their peers.
Sure.
Which is like so bizarre for me.
That's not uncommon though.
I show up as myself all the time.
Yeah.
Which gets me in trouble, sometimes. But I'd rather be myself because then I don't have to remember my story.
Yeah.
Because then I'm just me.
Yeah.
But a lot of these people were showing up as these different people, and I just didn't understand it. So
Yeah.
it's the hubris, it's the ego showing up versus the vulnerability. And I would say that the best groups are the ones where people get vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Is the ones where people stop trying to be the man, the woman, whatever, the leader, and just be a human.
Mm-hmm.
I use the term human doing versus human being.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us show up as human doings, and the most powerful groups are when people show up as their full self.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I'm having problems at home.
Mm-hmm.
Having problems with my kids. I'm having problems with my business. I'm having problems with my wife. And this is all affecting my life.
Yeah.
Because we're here. We
But
live our life.
that doesn't happen instantaneously
No.
in any team environment. You know, you've got the forming, storming, and then it takes some time before trust develops. So, I mean, in your experience with the peer groups that you've run, how long does that take before people do show up more as human beings?
I had a group that launched last year where one guy showed up so vulnerable, and one of the guys in the room said, "Oh my God, that is so powerful that you did that with people you barely knew."
Mm-hmm.
And it made the group show up more powerfully.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there are certain people that just show up that way naturally within a group.
Yeah.
But I would say for the groups that we ran, we would do 3 meetings a year. It took a year for the group. So we'd do a meeting, a phone call in between, another meeting, a phone call in between, another meeting. By the end of the first year, that group, we had 90+% renewal rates from
Okay.
those groups. So people started to see what the value of it was and what it could be.
Okay.
But it takes time. If you're doing a monthly meeting, I would say you'll know by 6-month point
Okay.
whether that group will really gel, which people need to go.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what I love to do was try and put the right people in the room. And what do those right people look like? And what does the mix of the room need to look like?
Okay. So, what makes a good peer group?
The participants make the peer group. I mean, if you get the right people in the room, the facilitator never is irrelevant. When the facilitator starts to become the teacher of everybody, so there's a blend. So I'll go through the journey of an entrepreneur. When entrepreneurs are less than 5-7 employees, at least in the world that I lived in, they were less sophisticated. And as they started to grow through the process, so we dealt with companies, typically our smallest clients in our peer groups were 10 employees.
Yeah.
And we went up to probably 125 employee companies. And in each group, we tried to build a mix between the bigger companies and the smaller companies. So what makes a good peer group is your question. I think what makes a good peer group is that you know in that group, let's say there's 12 people, that there's at least 4 or 5 people in that group that are truly your peers. And the ideal is never to be the biggest guy in the room and never be the smallest guy in the room. You want to be somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
That's what worked best for me and for other people that I knew. So if you were always the biggest guy in the room, you needed to be more mentor-y because you weren't going to get a lot of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were the smallest guy in the room, you need to know when to shut up.
Mm-hmm.
Because the challenge I had with the small guys is they had so much pain, they would take up so much time that it didn't affect anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So when managing a group, if you're going to bring smaller companies into a group with some bigger companies, you have to make sure that the smaller guys knew their place within the group.
Yeah.
And that they should do a lot of stuff one-on-one outside of the group versus
Right.
taking group time.
Yeah, and then
Where-
3 legs of the stool, it's like they should have been working with a mentor as opposed to bringing every single thing to the peer group.
Because that's the only place that they know.
Yeah.
So they're inexperienced in understanding what the journey actually looks like.
Yeah.
But the group is important. The facilitator makes the group more valuable. I'm a very loose facilitator. I like helping people get to the root cause of their issue.
Mhm.
I'm not big on the whole closure accountability. That was not a big part of my process. Although every meeting I'd ask people to biggest takeaway from the meeting, top 3 things you want to accomplish by the next meeting, we'd follow up on that. But there are some facilitators that are very strict. They go by a certain methodology, and this is what we're doing every meeting. That wasn't me.
Mhm.
I hired people that did that, and some
Yeah.
of those groups ran better. Some people liked the structure better, some people liked the looseness better. When I'm running my own group, I like creatives. I like people that like to think out of the box.
Sure.
Those are the people that work best in the groups that I facilitate. So I think a facilitator is important for the makeup of a group.
Okay.
And every group's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the group itself is a unique. What I found on my journey is we created some best friends. So if you think about the business I was in, specifically taking different people from different cities that did the same thing. They
Yeah.
were all around the same age. They'd all grown up in the same industry, and they really didn't know each other well.
So there weren't conflicts because they were geographic specific and they were territories.
Correct.
So even though they were in the same business, they weren't competing with each other.
Correct.
Okay.
And once I got to companies that were over 125 employees, they tended to be regional, if not half the nation.
Mhm.
I could never find peer groups for them because they always competed with somebody else. In the
Sure.
group. So that's why we stuck between the. Typically, we're targeting 20 to 100 employee companies.
Okay.
That was our sweet spot, and that was the best place for me personally.
Okay.
I enjoy the creativity of working with smaller companies. I left GE at 29 and vowed I'd never go work for another corporation again. I've kept my promise. So I don't understand.
And this worked out well for you.
This worked out pretty well. I have no complaints. I've been able to have a wonderful life. And
Yeah.
I looked at the whole working 50 weeks a year to get 2 weeks off, to work 5 days a week to get, that didn't work for me.
Yeah.
So I've had the freedom to do the things that I wanted to do by taking risk.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the entrepreneurial journey, is all about risk. And
Yeah.
it's all about
Risk reward, and hopefully having an ability to judge risk reward better than the general person does.
That's the challenge. So part of my last business was I was working with Cisco, I was working with IBM, I was working with the big major manufacturers
Right.
and the big distributors.
Yeah.
Tech Data, Ingram Micro, and I developed a program, what we developed as a team, called Understanding Your Partner's Business. And
Yeah.
I would talk to the manufacturers and distributors that had never run their own businesses before
Yeah.
about what it means to be an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
And one of my last slides was entrepreneurship is all about risk and potential reward.
Yeah.
The risk reward, I mean, the more risk you're willing to take, the more the potential reward. It's not the more reward.
Not necessarily. I mean, you can take a ton of risk that has no upside at all.
Agreed.
And that's discernment. And I think
I would agree.
one of the benefits of being in a peer group, and we've talked about this before, is you get the benefit of other people's experience, not just your own.
No question.
And you get 8 people in a room that are doing the same thing. You're definitely going to get exposure to problems that they've run into, and maybe it's not the ultimate solution. It's like when I'm coaching people, I'm like, I've seen this movie before. I've seen it in 3 different variants. It always turns out the same way. Now you can go ahead and do it if you
Right.
want to. That's your call. It's your business.
Mhm.
But this is hopefully some value to you that these are the specific things. This is not what I think. This is actually what happened.
Well, we talked about it earlier about this concept of the circle of knowledge.
Yeah.
So the circle of knowledge is like all the knowledge that exists in the world, and there's 3 pieces. The first piece is the stuff that you know. So I know my name, I know my birth date, I know where I was born, I know my wife's name, I do know her birth date, I hope you know your spouse's birthday. Those are important things to know.
Yeah.
The second piece of the pie, which is is a little bit bigger than the first piece, is the stuff you don't know. So I know that somebody can get to the moon, but I have no idea how to get there. I know there's such a thing as scratch golf. I know I'll never do that.
Mhm.
Those are things that I don't know, but I consciously don't know them. The biggest piece of the pie, probably 99% of all the knowledge in the world, is stuff that you don't know that you don't know.
Yeah.
And when you join a peer group, you see things that you never could have imagined in a business.
Yeah.
And I have some examples that are painful. I
Mhm.
mean, I know some people that literally went off the rails because of things that happened in their business.
Yeah.
Like destroyed their lives because of it.
Mhm.
And things that were totally out of their circle of knowledge.
But totally addressable if they would have had the knowledge and information available, because it wasn't unknowable. I mean, these are things
Right.
that, if somebody that had experience with those particular things, they could have benefited from that knowledge.
No question. No question at all. The biggest thing, if you were to ask me over 20 years, the people that got the most out of the groups were the people that showed up and really shared what was going on.
Yeah.
There were people that showed up all the time, and they showed up as their story.
Yeah.
And those are the people that kept coming back over and over again, and they were nice people, and they did good work, and they built decent companies. But the guys that really built companies
Mhm.
were guys that showed up and shared what was deeply going on with them, and the things that troubled them, and the things that got in their way, and that the group was there to support them on their journey, become their brothers.
Yeah.
I mean, we created some best friends. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that to this day, that there are people that went through our program that we had a trip in Chicago. I remember a group that was insane. I had a facilitator in the group. I just went to go, and we had this dinner at this beautiful steakhouse, and the guys went out afterwards. I went back to the hotel, and I get to the meeting the next morning, and I said, so where's Tim? And where's another guy? And I'm like, oh, you didn't hear? I'm like, hear what? Well, Tim had a little too much last night and fell down a flight of stairs, and he's in the hospital. He's got a slice. I'm like, guys, these guys just did so much together. They had so much bonding opportunity.
Yeah.
Because they were gone for 2 full days with their tribe, and they didn't get that very often. So there was a lot of camaraderie building, a lot of genuine getting to know. But they shared intimate details about their businesses, which helped them immensely.
Yeah.
So there's some real value in the experience, the wisdom that a facilitator brings, and that other people in the group bring.
Yeah. So getting back to tools.
Sure.
So, like you said, in the 90s, we didn't have all these tools, and now we have this overwhelming plethora of tools and networks and things like this. And I'm in a couple LinkedIn groups, and I'm in a couple Facebook groups, and I use Slack for my Inc. contributed article stuff, because Inc. has everybody on Slack, and I've used Asana with our software developers when we're doing things. So as far as, some people think of those as also mastermind groups or peer groups. Talk to me a little bit about that, and the benefits and disadvantages of those, and the difference between that and actually getting together with a group that you break bread with and do those kinds of things.
You can't replace human touch.
Yeah.
So the tools are really great for aggregating the information that's collected. I think the tools are great for staying connected between face-to-face gatherings.
Yeah.
But there's nothing like sitting down and actually seeing somebody's eyes, about seeing the confidence or lack of confidence. You do not get that. One of the challenges I have 2 teenagers, and just dealing with teenagers and the lack of emotion that they can describe in a text.
Sure.
And they're responding to a text in a way that's not the way that the person intended.
Right.
Because there's no way to discern emotion or what's going on with somebody's body language through text.
Right.
It just doesn't exist. So if you look at all the data, what is 7% of all communications is actually the words themselves.
Yeah.
And 55% is body language. So if that's the truth, then how can the virtual world replace what it is that we can do in person? And even when you do video, we've done video calls, I've tried just about everything, and other than Cisco's telepresence or these fully immersive virtual communities where you can actually have people in different places and see each other and almost share a meal in a virtual environment, you're still just getting a fraction of the value of a face-to-face community.
So you're not a believer in, like Zoom, which is what we use for
Sure.
our video conferencing and things like that, which is actually quite valuable. And I've done these kind of things with people throughout the world, in the UK and Germany, and had some great conversations. But I agree with you, when you sit down with people and you also are talking to them at the break, and you're having a meal with them, and you're doing those things, the depth of relationship is much deeper. There's just no way to do that just virtually. Now you can do virtually in between, but if you don't do that, getting to know people, it's tough.
We drank a lot of wine. So, but when there was one guy in our groups that everybody would say, I wish I was like Bob. This guy out of Dallas he called himself, he's a stupid Texan, and he was one of the smartest men I've ever met.
Mm-hmm.
4th generation business, been in business 100 years. They ended up buying a Cisco reseller down in Texas, and he was the most inquisitive human being I've ever met in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So he would go to somebody and he's like, tell me about yourself. And on a video conference where everybody's on a video online, there's no place for that dialogue to happen. So on the break, Bob would know, he wants to know how your kids are doing, he wants to know about your wife, he wants to know about all that stuff. And you do that at dinner, you do that between sets, and that's hard to replicate in a virtual world.
Yeah.
It really is. That part of it, and to me, that's where the depth of relationship comes. And that's where your judgment of who actually has value to what you're dealing with comes from as well.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of that genuineness of who are you truly as a human being, to me is critical. And that's hard to do virtually. But I have friends right now, I was just talking to somebody yesterday who runs groups for CTOs. here in town.
Yeah.
And they have 11 groups running, one of them virtual, and it's going really well. Technical resources, I could see a virtual group working really well because it's not as much about the human dynamic, but there's something about the entrepreneur, there's something about the CEO, there's something about the owner of a business where you live in such an isolated world that you really don't have a lot of people to talk to. And you don't want to talk to your spouse about, well, most people will share with 3 major places. They'll share all their information with their spouse, their lawyer, and their accountant. Their lawyer doesn't run a business, their accountant doesn't run a business, and their spouse is not running their business either. And if they are, then you need some space outside of the business to have a relationship with your spouse other than the business, and that's where the peer group is insanely valuable. That you can actually go spend time with people that are dealing with similar issues that you are, that have no vested interest in your business other than seeing you do well, and that are there for you. And it's an informal advisory board, yet it's a peer advisory board. Like they're helping you and you're helping them. Just going out and getting an advisory board is also valuable. There's nothing wrong with doing as many things as you can. The more information you have, the more knowledge you have to grow your business effectively. I've always said it to me, business is not complicated, people are complicated. So the business itself, find a product or a service that you can sell for more than it costs you to deliver, and deliver it effectively and take care of your clients. Whatever that looks like. Whether there's IP attached to it or not. To me, at this stage of my career, in my mid-50s, I'm like, okay, I've done enough service work. I'm looking at product. I'm looking at stuff that's defensible, stuff that you can actually sell. And if I do a good job, I can sell lots of it, and it's not me. Because I've sold me for 25 years.
It's more scalable. Or can be. I mean, there are services businesses that can be scalable as well.
No question. And I've been down that road too. What I've learned about myself is I'm not an operator. I've learned about where I fit. This whole journey has been just that. And this is one of the things that a peer group is really powerful for if you do it in the right way, in an effective way. I do a lot of work around behavioral styles and helping people understand themselves. And once they understand themselves, they can understand the dynamics of the group. And the dynamics of the group and how the group interacts with each other is a metaphor for how their own companies are working. So they're going to see people in their group that act like somebody in their company. So I'll give you the CFO, CEO, sales manager. So in most, I wrote so many blogs and so many pieces around this. I've even had conversations with audiences about CFOs and financial people saying all salespeople lie. And it's like, well, why do you think salespeople lie? He says, well, when I ask him what happened at that meeting, he'll say, I don't remember. And me as a CFO, I remember every conversation I've had for the last 20 years. And if most people believe that other people function the same way they do, which is, I believe, what most people today believe, that, well, somebody might see the world a little bit differently, but it's close, which is totally not the truth, then I can see where a finance person gets really pissed at a salesperson. And it's the same thing in the dynamics in a CEO roundtable.
Well, in that particular example too, you have somebody that likes to live in a black and white world dealing with somebody that loves the shades of gray.
And they're going to see 50 clients in a month. And it's like, okay, what happened in that conversation? Well, I had the same. I start off with in my sales process, I have 15 to 20 questions that I start with. And if I hit a chord on the third one, then I don't get to 4 through 20. So I just go deep in that one. So I don't know whether I hit the 4th chord or the 5th chord or the 7th chord with that client. I don't remember. I really don't remember. Because I've seen so many people since. But the finance person has no idea and can't imagine living in a world like that. So there's a lot of animosity. And what I'm saying is the same thing happens in your group. You'll have owners that are finance oriented. And you'll have owners that are sales oriented. And you'll have owners that are operationally oriented. And you start to see the roles of different people on your management team within your group, and you see how the dynamic works there. It's a really good little incubator.
That's cool. And as you know, I've been running companies for the last 18 years, and this is my 4th company. So that CEO role, business owner role, is very isolating, especially as you're building a bigger business, because you have lots of employees, and you have your team, and you have your board, and you have advisory boards and things like that. But there's not one place where you can turn unless you have a real true peer group of other CEOs and business owners that you can confide in and have some trust in. But what's happened in those experiences for me, and this also if you get a great mentor, which I've had some amazing mentors, is that it's about the whole you. It's about your life. It's about your kid is having a drug problem, or you're going through a divorce, or you're having difficulty in some aspect of your life, and it's not just about the business. And it's very difficult to talk about those types of things, in a business setting with your team or your board, and if part of the conflict is with your spouse, obviously you can't talk to her about it or him about it. So talk to me a little bit about your experience with that, with some of the peer groups that you've run and been involved in.
Yeah, I would say the most powerful conversations we've ever had in groups were revolving around those painful issues in people's lives.
Yeah.
And one of my clients right now in Florida, they have a CFO, and she just had a baby that they knew was going to have a hole in their heart and the whole company. And when you're in a group with people like that, people know, and they want to support you and they want to be there for you. But if you don't have that support system, I mean, it's all about developing a support system.
Yeah.
We were not meant to live on this planet in isolated boxes.
Yeah.
Yet that's how we're building our lives these days.
Mm-hmm.
I had one client, I still boggles my mind. Had him join a peer group. Took us a while to get him in, but he finally joined, and we started working with him one-on-one. And he was like, I said, so how often does your leadership team meet? He's like, what do you mean? I said, no, how often do you hold leadership team meetings? He says, I don't. He'd been running a business for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Had 95 employees. I'm like, so tell me how this all works. And he said, well, everybody comes to me with all their problems, and I try and solve them all. I'm like, now I know why you're stressed to all hell, because A, you don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And B, how do you empower your team? It's like coming in at halftime with your basketball team and talking to each player one at a time.
Yeah.
And saying, go back on the field and go play better now.
Yeah.
So there's these ways that we see the world based on our own framework that we says, oh, business must act this way because that's how I was raised. But the truth is, in these groups, you get to see how other people function.
Yeah.
And when you see the best businesses, so we brought in we did a lot of reading. So every meeting you'd have to read a book. So we only did 3 meetings a year, so every meeting we're reviewing a book. We brought in outside speakers to talk about everything from ESOPs and legal stuff. I mean, when you bring in outside experts that bring in value to the group, then you start to build a dynamic and a reservoir of knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah.
That when a problem comes up from somebody, whether it's personal or, I mean, I've seen situations where somebody had a real problem health-wise, and their wife was dealing with something in another city. There was an expert that was somebody's friend, and they were on an airplane to that hospital the next day, getting that dealt with. That stuff you can't replace.
Yeah.
That stuff doesn't happen. And YPO is probably the most well-known for that, is their network internationally is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a number of friends that are YPO members, and I have a good friend here in town who's been in his own YPO forum here, and now he's in a forum for transitioning to sales. I mean, they have forums for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them are self-directed, and as you become, one of the powers of self-direction in those groups like YPO and EO is that you learn to be a better leader within your own organization by being a partial leader within your own forum and holding other people accountable. So all the tools that you learn to self-facilitate will help you in your own company's development.
But can't you do that in a facilitated group too,
Sure.
where you kind of have a token passing type of thing where somebody is virtually the leader for that meeting or the chairperson for that meeting? Or?
We never did that. We had people host meetings, so they acted as the host for it, but the facilitator was always the facilitator.
Okay.
We had a methodology that we used, the Socratic method, when people brought up real problems.
Yeah.
When we did deep dives with people, we really taught the group to question.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't, but people get smart. They start asking questions that are pretty pointed that don't actually sound like questions, but they're really questions.
Yeah.
So how do you get that methodology built within a group? And that's the important job of the facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the dynamics of the group was hugely important. Getting back to what makes a good group is that when you have one bad person in the group, and I would switch people between groups because I didn't think they fit.
Yeah.
And there were some groups that were much more tolerant of people that spoke too much.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some groups that were just all about details and getting stuff done. And depending upon the territories, and I had overlap in certain cities, I would move people from group to group periodically. Because the group did get stale after a certain time without new blood. So even when you have a group in a city, I have friends that have groups that have been together for 10 years. And it's the same 10 to 12 people, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And you start talking about things that you never would have imagined you're sharing with these other business people. So, and that's something I've learned in my own life. The more vulnerable I am, just in meeting people for the first time, I do a lot of networking. I meet a lot of people for the first time, and I stopped asking what they do. I'm just done. I mean, if I like you based on who you are, then I'll find out what you do, or somebody will have already told me what you do, so I kind of have an idea.
Sure.
I'm more interested in the person, and I'm more interested in that in the groups as well. I mean, their business problems will always be business problems.
Yeah.
And here's a book to read, and here's a person to call, and here's all that stuff. But who are you? What makes you tick? What do you most want out of this business? Because to me, one of the lines that I learned early on, and I say this all the time, is a business is a vehicle to meet the needs of your life. I don't believe our culture functions that way. I think our culture functions in the way that your business is your life. And it doesn't leave much room, especially coming from New York.
Yeah.
Oh my God, one of the reasons I moved to San Diego is because I wanted to have a life. I didn't want to have business and then some other time where I did some other stuff. When I came to San Diego, I had a freedom in New York, and I couldn't find anybody to go play with in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Unless they were making millions, and I wasn't making millions. I mean, I was making a decent living, but everybody else who was making a decent living had a job. And in New York, it's 7 to 7. So you get home for dinner, and by the time you're ready to go to bed, you do it all over. So that's 5 days a week. So you got a couple of days to play with your kids, and that's it. San Diego, there are people, I can find people to do anything I want just about any day of the week. If I want to go play some tennis in the middle of the day, middle of the week, people live that way here. It's part of their life here.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that attracted me, as well as the weather.
Yeah.
So
talk to me a little bit about networking, accessing your peers' networks, not in the sense of trying to do business with your peers or,
Sure.
try to do business with their networks, but, the expansion of the network seems to be one of the biggest benefits, because somebody might know somebody, and I even use LinkedIn for this, where
Sure.
I want to meet somebody and I'll look within my network, does somebody in my network know this person? But in peer groups, even more so.
No question. When you know what you're looking for and you can articulate it clearly, people in the room will know something or someone.
Yeah.
And when you have, it all comes down to the fundamentals. And if you look at Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, the foundation of it is trust.
Yeah.
And if you have trust, people will introduce you. That's why, for me, I don't like joining other people's networking groups. Because I usually walk into a room, there's 15 people in the room, and I like 3 or 4. And then there's 10 people I got to deal with every time I go to the meeting that I don't want, so I've always started my own. I've always handpicked the people that I want to spend time with. And I'll take the time to build it over a year or so, or maybe more, rather than asking somebody else if I could join their group.
Yeah.
I just never found it valuable to me because I couldn't build it. I didn't want to build trust with some of the people in the room. So I just didn't.
Yeah.
But I found that starting things from scratch, that foundation of trust is what makes everything work. So when you have that trust, people will open up their kimono, they'll open up everything to you.
Yeah.
And the more trust you have, the more genuine people will be, and the more willing they'll be to open up those relationships. So whether it's a doctor that they know that you need help from, or it's a potential client, or a strategic alliance or direction you're going with a new part of your business, whatever that is, those doors definitely. But you seem to live in a pretty big world, as do I. But that's not true of most entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Most entrepreneurs I've met live in very small worlds. They have their 20 to 30 people they know through their kids, friends, and then they got their clients, and then they've got a handful of people, and then they're out of time.
Well, I mean, it's changed for me over the last 3 years too, where, when I was running a big international company.
You had no time.
No, I mean, I'm on an airplane 65, 70% of the time, traveling, meeting with customers, meeting with employees in remote sites. It's a different lifestyle doing that. And I did it from San Diego, so I didn't really benefit from the San Diego lifestyle in that period of time. But I still enjoyed myself, enjoyed what I was doing, and there were, I'm very achievement oriented, so it was, gratifying in terms of a lot of the things that we were accomplishing, and we're creating wealth for a lot of people and making money for investors, and it was a cool thing. Now I have a little bit more balance in my life, and I love that too. It wasn't that I hated what I did before and I love what I do now. I think that the isolating aspect of being a CEO, and especially a public company CEO, is tough, and nobody's going to feel sorry for you. But at the same time,
it's hard.
Finding ways to deal with that through having the right mentors, through having the right peer groups.
Yes.
And if you do networking in that case, it's typically networking within your industry. because you just don't have time. It's kind of like when I went. There's been a couple times in my life where I've had that kind of wide open space opportunity. Like when I went back to grad school, I have an engineering undergrad. I worked for 5 years, and then I decided to go back and get an MBA. Because I had no guilt about looking at other business opportunities or anything like that, it provided me that kind of wide open field to talk to different people. Should I do consulting? Should I do investment banking? Should I go back into industry? If I go into industry, should I go into finance, or should I stay in kind of the operations and marketing and business side? So that was a great time of my life, but then eventually kind of for somebody like me, you have to get back to the productivity
right.
and achievement side of it. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but just a sidebar.
I'm almost in that same exact place right now.
Yeah.
Because the business I had for 19 years, I said goodbye to at the end of 2014 for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Took 6 months off, traveled the world with my wife and kids, and came back to San Diego 2 years ago and started from scratch.
Yeah.
And I had a really good idea of what I was going to build when I came back. And it didn't work out that way. So now I'm at this place where, okay, I have certain skills. What do I do with those skills? And I think most entrepreneurs don't do that.
Yeah.
They end up in a business and they end up doing whatever the business requires. They don't learn to surround themselves with people that balance them. There's all these different issues that during a peer group, when you start to see people that actually have, all of Lencioni's books are great. I don't know if you've ever read Patrick Lencioni. He's got 9 different fables out, and then he wrote a book called The Advantage. And in each one, he pretty much has someone whose life is easy and someone whose life is hard.
Yeah.
And it's the perspective of the two.
Yeah.
And why does one person's life easier than the other? It's because they do the right things, and they do the right things right.
Yeah.
So most people don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Because they've never run a business before.
Mm-hmm.
And the most successful business owners tend to have had some warts and bruises. And you said before about telling somebody, well, I've seen this play out this way and I know it's going to happen this way, but sometimes people just need to learn the lesson themselves. No matter how much you tell them that that's going to work this way, they still say, well, I need to learn this one on my own.
Yeah. Which is fine.
It's fine.
It's their life, it's their business. So getting to the survey.
Sure.
So Larry asked me to do a survey within my network of 3 questions. Have you been in a peer group? Are you in a peer group now? Are you interested in joining a peer group? And a lot of people came in with anecdotal information as well. But I don't know how well you'll see this, but we can definitely send it out on the screen too. But people that have been in a peer group, it's pretty split, 50-50. About half of people have been in peer groups. Now, granted, some of those people actually hadn't been in peer groups as we're talking about it. They've been in advisory groups or things like that. But I mean, people had some experience with peer groups. The more interesting thing was, are they in a peer group now? Only about 14% of the people surveyed are in a peer group now, and yet 80% of people are interested in joining a peer group. So there's this disconnect, and I pushed in a little bit further than that. The final pie chart, this isn't a direct question, this is combining 2 questions together. Of those interested in being a peer group now, are they participating in a peer group now? Only 14%. So the thing that kind of I took away from this is why? What's the why beneath this? And there are really kind of 3 questions, or three reasons. I don't have time, I don't want to spend the money, and I'm not sure I'm going to get the value out of it. So talk to me about those 3 things and kind of how you've addressed those in building peer groups in your business.
Well, the easy answer about the time thing is you don't have the time not to.
Yeah.
If I can save you more time. So if you're going to spend in the groups that we have now and the groups we're talking about, probably half a day a month.
Right.
So if I can't save you 4 hours a month in that through the groups efforts, then I'm an idiot. So I'll just start there.
Yeah.
The cost wise, everybody's got things they got to decide and balance between what they're going to spend money on. There's lots of things you can spend money on for the cost of a peer group. I don't think you'll find a more cost-effective investment in your business than a peer group. Some of the peer groups run as much as probably $1,100-$1,200 a month. On the lower end, probably $500 a month and up. Somewhere in that ballpark is where you're gonna see effective groups. And you had asked earlier about groups with no fee, and I think you get a lot of flakiness without fees. I think people need to pay.
Yeah.
Something for nothing has no value. But
And all the research I've done around that too, the level of commitment isn't
Correct.
really there if there isn't, a pay-to-play type of thing. And it can be quite modest. I mean, honestly, $500 is like 2 reasonable dinners as long as you don't buy super expensive wine. So, if you're very frugal, it's still like, 5 dinners or something like that?
It's still not crazy.
Yeah.
And the value that you get from it is, for most of the clients we dealt with over the years, they would have one situation a year that would pay for their entire membership.
Yeah.
Whatever it is we saved them, whatever it is that they were dealing with, every member, just about every member every year, had that moment, that aha, that thing that made the entire investment worthwhile.
That's been my experience too, the high impact element of things. And I've got a story unrelated but kind of makes the point.
Sure.
So I have my best friend lives in St. Louis. We've been best friends. We played high school football together. We've known each other for a long time because you know how old I am. But he is a mortgage broker, and he built this massive mortgage business. He was top 30 under 30 in St. Louis, and then top 40 under 40, and got completely wiped out during the downturn, the real estate downturn. But he still does a mortgage business now. And I recently bought a house here. I'm an independent business owner now, so with Dodd-Frank, there's very difficult for even doctors and lawyers that have been in business for a long period of time to get a traditional mortgage. And I went to 3 different companies here, but because of that relationship and because he actually knows what he's doing, he was able to get me a traditional mortgage, at a reasonable rate and save me probably $100,000, over period of like 5 years compared to some other kind of lending. And that's the thing that I've seen also with peer groups, is that aha moment. It's having an advisor, it's having a mentor, it's having somebody that you're in a particularly difficult business situation and you don't have a path. How do I deal with this situation? And somebody has an insight. So it's not like you get huge value every single meeting, but there's that one thing that's like, this is going to save me a couple $1 million, or this is going to make me $10 million, or this is going to be something that I eliminate this massive amount of risk from my business that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, I'll give you another twist on that. In the peer group meetings, most of the people that I focused energy on felt guilty for taking time away from the group.
Yeah.
And the funniest part is it's the people that are participating in the process that get more value than the person who we're trying to solve the problem for.
Yeah.
Because you get to creatively think, and a lot of times you'll get triggered by something that they're going through that will let you see your business in a different way.
Yeah.
Because the person who's going through the problem is going through the problem, and they're going to try to solve the problem.
And you're in the woods.
So
You're in
Exactly.
the woods, and you don't have that even 5,000, much less 30,000 foot perspective. And that's actually one of the things that I love about what I'm doing now, is I get to leverage my decades of experience doing this with other entrepreneurs. I mean, I met a guy yesterday, and he wants to raise money, and they've got some litigation going on, and his existing investors don't want to put more money in, and it's like I was able to give him some perspective on that. He had a gut feeling about it, but it's like he's being pushed in a direction that really, why do you want to do this now? Why not wait 3 months? Why, these are the questions you're going to get from somebody that you're talking to, that you're asking to invest in this business, and it's not going to be a good conversation. And you have to disclose this stuff, because if you don't, then it's fraud. So it's just interesting to kind of have these types of conversations with people. And he was so excited. And he came to retain me to help him with something. I'm like, I'll 3 months down the road, if you still decide you want to work with me, I'm happy to help you. But all you're going to be doing now is spending money on something that isn't going to address the issue that you have. You need to spend your effort on addressing this issue as opposed to doing this.
Right.
It was really great.
It happens over and over again when people feel like they have no choice.
Yeah.
And what a peer group will teach you is that you always have choice.
Yeah.
And there are some choices that are better than others. So I've been through I was just counting it up. I wrote a blog this morning about this to let people know, and I don't know, it's probably been 500 plus peer group meetings that I've facilitated over 20 years.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, and workshops and everything else. I've met a lot of business owners, and I've seen a lot of stories, and it all comes down to just shortest path to the objective that you want.
Yeah.
How do you get from where you are to where you want to go? And it starts with understanding where you want to go.
Yeah.
And that's part of the peer group as well, is helping people clearly identify why they have a business.
Yeah.
Because most people don't even understand the impact that they have. I saw more people that were better off getting jobs than owning their own business. They thought they had more freedom.
Yeah.
But they really didn't. They had more stress, more responsibility. Their house was on the line,
Yeah.
everything. I mean, they don't even realize how much pain they're in
Yeah.
until somebody says, well, my life looks like this. Well, how do I do that? And then you just take them on that path of, how do I help them do that?
Yeah. I
That's a lot of
remember
work.
early in my career, this is when I was in my 20s, and I was involved in this, workshop organization where we had peer groups associated with it. And two of the things that they talked about was, you got this 360 degrees in a circle, and when you're making decisions, you only see 0 and 180, most people. So having other people around you, you can actually see these other alternatives. And the other one was, stand like 2 feet away from this curtain, how many folds do you see? If you step back 10 feet, 20 feet, you see vastly more folds, vastly more opportunities. And I think accessing, the mastermind, when more than one mind gets together and you do a mind melt, so to speak, the possibilities, as long as you're asking questions and as long as you're listening and as long as you're willing to learn, the world opens up.
Yeah, you need to. The biggest thing that I've seen in this whole process for me is the ego. And if you can let go of the ego and just be okay with being yourself and letting the answers evolve through the process, and not you don't have to have all the answers all the time. It's one of the challenges, like the client I was talking about before that never brought his leadership team in. He thought he was supposed to have all the answers.
Yeah.
The truth is you don't. There's no way. There's so much information out there. There's no way you can have all the answers to everything.
One, it's fascinating to me because limited success combined with ego puts up a barrier because I am successful.
Based on what?
Right. But think about how much more successful you could possibly be if you actually had an open mind and you actually were receptive to some of this other input. And you have to have discernment. I mean, you get input all the time, and some of it you have to put by the wayside, and that doesn't apply in my circumstance. But I do see, working with entrepreneurs, and not only in my current business, but throughout my career, there are just some people that are so incredibly hard-headed and so unreceptive to any kind of input, and have that ego and have that shell and have that, stay away from me, I'm going to do it my way, and I have a little bit of that inside myself. You have to have that drive, you have to have that passion, but if you have it to the point where you no longer can learn, that becomes a problem, and it usually leads to business failure or business mediocrity.
Right. And don't join our peer group.
Yeah.
If you're not, you don't want them in the group. They're no fun.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things about the groups. If you put the right people in the group,
Yeah.
it's a ton of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a lot of juice flowing, and I enjoy the philosophical conversations of why.
Yeah.
So if you look at Simon Sinek and all his why behind them, to me, you can do tactical stuff whenever you want to.
Yeah.
Very hard to get a group of really smart people together to talk about the things that matter most in life.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that we avoid as a culture.
Okay.
And this isolation piece, I think we're even, as families, we're living in these small little nucleus when our ancestors lived in large communities. And as business owners, we live in this little world versus being part of a much bigger community that helps us on our journey. There's so many guides there. And you asked before about the size of the companies in the group and what makes up a better group. This is the thing that I've seen. It's not an idea. This is something.
Yeah.
I've seen the littlest guy in the room come up with the best opportunities and pursuing things that the bigger companies eventually were going to adopt.
Yeah.
So if you look at it's not the big that eat the small, it's as fast that eat the slow. The fast are usually the smaller companies.
Yeah.
So if you're in a group where there are some smaller companies, you get to see some things that people can see results on really quickly.
Yeah.
And if you're a bigger company, you're not going to see the results on it because you've got all these things to manage.
Yeah.
So you can watch littler companies do some really cool stuff. And say, you know what, I can adopt that. I see where he's going with that, and I can now adopt that into my business a lot easier than if I would have tried to do all those things myself.
Right.
So there is some real value to having different sized companies as long as you feel like you have enough people in the group to be your peer.
Yeah. And a level of mutual respect. You know, that's a
To the
big,
core of all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't be in a group with people that you don't appreciate who they are,
Yeah.
or what they bring.
But that diversity does help, diversity in age, diversity in size, you know, as long as you feel like you can relate from a peer level. And I mean, I learn stuff all the time from people, you know, much younger than me because they just grew up a different way than I did. And they can think of ways to, a much more efficient way. The person that's one of my main software developers, he's in Poland, and fortunately, you know, as you know, I was just on my honeymoon, and I never met him. I've had a 2-year relationship with him, but I was able to meet him and his girlfriend, and you know, he's one of the smartest software people in Poland. You know, he was accepted in all the special programs and everything. But just being able to hang out with him was like so much fun. But I've learned so much from him because how he grew up, his way of thinking is so vastly different than mine, and the guy's less than half my age, you know, but every time I talk to him, I learn something.
Very methodical, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, not me.
Well, I mean, I think we're about out of time. We do have time for a few more questions if you have any questions for me or for Larry.
I don't have any right now.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Really appreciate you being
My
here today,
pleasure.
Larry. This was awesome. And I'm sure we'll have some follow-up from this, and we'll keep you guys abreast of what's going on through my blog site, through Larry's. And might even be that we, you know, ignite some more peer group activity. I think that, especially based on the survey, I think that there's obviously a market need out there, and, you know, maybe there's a way that we can help facilitate that.
Sounds great.
Terrific. Thank you, Larry.
Pleasure.
This is Patrick Henry, the CEO of QuestFusion with The Real Deal What Matters. And again, we're talking with Larry Kesslin today from 5 Dots.